Why, my eye, sir. You've never used them before.
Well, this brings me to the second novel in Blatty's trilogy titled The Ninth Configuration, which he wrote in 1966 and was made into a film of the same name and released in 1980, which incidentally contains some very compelling nods to a couple of Stanley Kubrick films, one of which was released in the same year, I believe. And I will be going into it more in my upcoming Kubrick film analysis, so stay tuned for that. Running long here, so I'm going to blaze through this. So check this out. The Ninth Configuration is the story of an army psychiatric hospital located in an abandoned castle on a remote mountain that treats only high-ranking military personnel. Blatty wrote and directed, scripting the film as a dark, absurdist comedy. As you can see, Pazuzu and a mix of religious and satanic statues, looking like the Denver airport, are oddly part of the facility's decor. Colonel Hudson Kane, played by Stacy Keach, is a military psychiatrist who is brought in from a special unit with the task of determining if these high-ranking Army vets, fresh off the front lines, are faking their insanity to get out of active duty. All of the patients are decorated Army vets except one, Captain Billy Cutshaw, played by Scott Wilson, who also plays Dr. Temple in The Exorcist III, an astronaut who had a last-minute mental breakdown and was dragged screaming from the launch pad, causing the Apollo mission to the moon to be aborted. The entire film follows Colonel Kane as he tries to treat these men, while the facility doctor observes and sort of tags along, using an unconventional form of therapy where Kane plays along with the men's delusions in the hopes they will eventually see their psychosis and be cured. But the story focuses largely on Cutshaw, who is in an existential crisis. Kane keeps probing Cutshaw with questions, wanting to know why he did not want to go to the moon, but Cutshaw refuses to answer, instead giving him a St. Christopher medal. St. Christopher was believed to be this 7-foot, 8-foot tall Canaanite giant, a ruthless soldier with a fearsome head and face like a dog who lived in the 3rd century. His birth name was Reprobus, where we get the word reprobate, and is said to have had a conversion to the faith after a mysterious encounter with Jesus, who after changed his name to Christopher, Christ-bearer. Christopher was later martyred for the faith by beheading and then canonized as a saint. And you can see these icons portraying him as the dog-faced saint. The Ninth Configuration mostly consists of a dialogue between Colonel Kane and Cutshaw, sort of in the spirit of another possession film, Nefarious, where they hash out whether or not God exists, which is leveraged in Cutshaw's mind upon human suffering. While Cutshaw rejects the notion of God because bad things happen, Kane asks him why he couldn't see God based on the good in the world. Cutshaw simply cannot accept that there is any genuine good in society anywhere. While there is a whole group of eccentrics here, the main story revolves around Cutshaw's need to reconcile his crisis of alienation, a topic discussed at great length by Marxist philosopher and founding member of the School of Frank, Erich Fromm. Interestingly enough, Blatty makes a cameo appearance in this film as a military psychiatrist named Fromm, who is now a patient at the facility. Alienation, in the context of Fromm, is reconciling for oneself that God does not exist, and that man is alone in the world. In other words, Fromm rationalizes how to become an atheist without, losing your marbles in the process. Fromm, much like Eliphas Levi, was obsessed with biblical themes, particularly those found in the book of Genesis and around original sin and the fall of man, and made it his life's mission to reframe these concepts to fit his Marxist worldview. In his book Escape from Freedom, published in 1941, Fromm wrote, quote, "Hegel and Marx have laid the foundation for the understanding of the problem of alienation. We are proud that in his conduct of life, man has become free from external authorities, which tell him what to do and what not to do. Both the sadistic and the masochistic trends are caused by the inability of the isolated individual to stand alone, and his need for a symbiotic relationship, or some external authority over him, to overcome his aloneness." End quote. Echoing what Michael Aquino said earlier, an emancipation from a loving God is essential for being the new man in the satanic socialist new order.
From our point of view, it really makes no difference whether you pray to a father god, or to a mother goddess, or to an entire gaggle of gods and goddesses. You're still wishing the same thing. You're still wishing to be included. You're still wishing for their acceptance. You're waiting for them to put their arm or arms around you and say, you belong, you are part of us, you can relax, we will take care of you.
For Fromm, believing in God turns you into this hostile, crazed lunatic. The devil, my dear friends, has nothing to do with it. But godly morality, well, that is the root of all evil, according to Fromm. Fromm believed that man could, quote-unquote, give up God, who he purports never existed, and establish a concept of man as a being who is alone in the world, but who can feel at home in it if he achieves union with his fellow man and with nature. All that matters is that the opportunity for genuine activity be restored to the individual. Genuine activity is newspeak for labor for the state. In other words, not capitalist-driven labor that benefits only the man himself. All that matters is the opportunity for genuine activity be restored to the individual, and that the purposes of society and of his own become identical." End quote. And this is cleverly evidenced in the 9th configuration, after Cutshaw finds the St. Christopher medal left for him in the taxi after Cain allowed himself to die from a bar fight that takes place toward the end of the film. You have to watch the movie for this to make sense, but instead of humbling himself to his assaulters, these violent bikers, he snaps and attacks them, and then allows himself to die of his wounds in some act of self-sacrificing martyrdom to show Cutshaw that he can right his own wrongs, that goodness really does exist, but it exists between men, between people.
Captain Cutshaw, I am taking my life in the hope that my death may provide a shock that has curative value. In any case, you now have your one example.
Finding the medal in the taxi was not a miracle of God. It was not a supernatural sign of the afterlife, as the story suggests. It's the message that goodness in the world, what we once saw as originating with God and as evidence of God, is nothing more than humans sharing goodwill between each other, down through the ages, down through history. Fromm continues in his book, You Shall Be as Gods, a radical interpretation of the Old Testament and its tradition. Quote, "In the process of history, man gives birth to himself. He becomes what he potentially is, and he attains what the serpent, the symbol of wisdom and rebellion, promised, and what the patriarchal, jealous God of Adam did not wish, that man would become like God himself." End quote. As I mentioned before, Cain treats the patients by role-playing with them inside their delusions, all while the hospital doctor, Colonel Fell, oversees and observes from the sidelines. And here's the twist. Cain starts having nightmares about a man he thinks is his twin brother, Vincent Killer Cain. But as the story unfolds, we realize they aren't twin brothers, they're the same person. Cain is a patient, being role-played in his delusion by Colonel Fell, who has been large and in charge the whole time. Hudson Cain, this soft-spoken, caring man, this healer, is the dissociated alter that Killer Cain created to deal with the atrocities he committed during the war, where he murdered in cold blood 30 men. So let's sum this up real quick. A secret military psychiatric hospital, hidden away in an abandoned castle on a remote mountain, where it seems to always be raining, houses a handful of high-ranking military vets, who are treated through role-playing techniques that are designed to direct them out of their delusions. Does that sound familiar to you? Because it sounds very familiar to me. Martin Scorsese's film Shutter Island mirrors this plot almost to the letter. Shutter Island tells the story of U.S. Marshal Ted Daniels, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner, who arrive at Shutter Island located somewhere off the coast of Massachusetts in an old Civil War-era fort that's been converted into a government institution for the criminally insane. Ted, who was a soldier in World War II and plagued with intense, vividly colored hallucinations of his wife, who died in a fire 2 years earlier, and flashbacks of the Dachau concentration camp where he and other U.S. soldiers executed German guards in cold blood as they tried to surrender. That's a real war crime, by the way. You can look that up. Ted, however, is in reality a man named Andrew Latis, who had created this dissociated alter personality to escape the unbearable truth of his war crime, and that his wife, whose mental illness he ignored and neglected, murdered their 3 children. The facilitating doctor, played by Ben Kingsley, engages Ted in an extensive role-playing scheme to try and break him from his delusion. If he cannot, he will be lobotomized and stored away at this facility until the day he dies. Ted's delusion that he is a U.S. Marshal sent to the facility to investigate an unrelated murder, a facility that is most likely engaged in monstrous mind control experiments at the hands of an Operation Paperclip-style psychosurgeon, is supposed to be part of the delusion that he fashioned for himself. At the end of the role-playing operation, Ted realizes who he is and allows himself to be lobotomized in an act of self-sacrifice similar to Colonel Kane in the 9th configuration. Now here's my take. Forget the storyline, forget the narrative, forget what Laeddis believes, none of that matters. The whole film appears to be an exhibition of the mind control and brainwashing techniques used in institutions like the example Scorsese gives here in Shutter Island. Ted's narrative did not have to pose him as a U.S. Marshal. He could have been anything, anyone. This is evidenced by the cave scene where the narrative is provided for him, which Laeddis is led to believe he had suspected all along.
Do you know how pain enters the body, Marshal? Do you? It has nothing to do with the flesh. The brain controls pain. The brain controls fear, empathy, sleep, hunger, anger, everything. What if you could control it? Recreate a man so he doesn't feel pain or love or sympathy. A man who can't be interrogated because he has no memories to confess.
It's a completely disjointed part of the narrative. Ted does not need this to personally maintain his own delusion. It's as if the doctors needed to incorporate this layer of paranoia, that if Ted were to somehow become cognizant of the experiments they are conducting on him, this was the way to shut it down. It's all in his mind, you see. It's gaslighting on steroids. The psychosurgeons of that day subscribed to the distorted philosophies and pseudo-psychologies coming from an atheistic socialist worldview of the philosophers and practitioners of that time. They saw human beings as blank slates, of which dark psychiatric and surgical techniques could be used to erase anything that currently exists in the mind, and then write upon the gray matter any storyline, any series of manufactured memories, any persona or character profile, even a multi-layered narrative that completely destabilized Laeddis, where there isn't the slightest chance that he could extract what is true or what is false, is part of the process and precisely the point. After they're done with him, there is no Andrew Laeddis. Laeddis is gone and may have never even existed. You simply cannot discern between what is real and what is manufactured. This marks the success of the experiment and the genius of Scorsese, who at the end shows Laeddis in a final act of self-preservation, ready to be lobotomized to escape the reality that they created in him, even though none of it might have occurred. It's the kind of crazy for which there is no way to recover. You simply cannot come back from something like this. What Blatty and Scorsese have in common is the foundational notion, rooted in socialist philosophy, that man is a product of history, not of nature. He's not made in the image of God. He's a blank slate, for which history and men write upon him his narrative, making humans nothing more than mere hackable animals, who could be programmed to do or think anything. Animals with animal drives. You're just an animal that can be trained to do anything they want you to do.